At 29, I thought I understood what silence was. I had signed death certificates with hands that didn't shake. I had stood over steel tables while the city slept and believed that the worst thing a body could do was remind you that it used to be warm. That belief lasted until the night the morgue sounded like it exhaled. My shift ran late afternoon into the deep hours. Hospitals sent their paperwork when the day staff wanted closure. Police and medical transporters arrived after midnight, moving through the back entrance with the speed of people who had learned not to look too long at what they carried. In the public imagination, a morgue is all horror. In reality, it is routine, fluorescent light, disinfectant, stainless steel, labels, forms, chain of custody signatures, and a constant cold that settles into your bones until you stop noticing it. The building had its own noises. The refrigeration compressors kicked on and off. The ventilation sighed through ducts. The automatic door to the loading bay clanked when it sealed. If you worked enough nights, you stopped hearing those sounds as separate things and started hearing them as one steady mechanical lullaby. That lullaby is how you convince yourself you are alone. That lullaby is how you forget there are rooms in the building designed for things that do not breathe. That night, around 10 p.m., I was in the admin room, finishing intake documentation from an earlier transfer when a sound cut cleanly through the lullaby, a slow, tired exhale. Not air rushing through a vent, not a pressure hiss. A human breath emptied all the way, the kind you hear when someone is exhausted and alone. My pen paused above a line where my signature belonged. I held still and waited for the follow-up that would make it make sense. A cough, a radio squawk, a footstep, Evan calling my name from the hall, the night security guard clearing his throat. I heard only the fluorescent hum and the thin scratch of my own breathing inside my mask. Then the exhale came again, closer, as if it had been released right against the cold room door. I told myself what I tell myself every time I feel my imagination reach for the supernatural. There is always a physical explanation. Air moves, metal expands, machines mimic living noises. The mind, when tired, invents patterns to keep itself alert. My job depends on skepticism. If I lose that, I become useless. I pushed back from the desk, stood, and walked toward refrigeration. The corridor outside the cold room always felt a degree darker, even under the same lights. The floor tiles were smoother there, cleaner in a way that reminded you how often they were disinfected. The cold room door was industrial, thick, meant to seal tight. The handle felt colder than it should have even through my glove. When I pulled it open, a dense wave of refrigerated air rolled out and hit my face and throat, sharp with antiseptic and metal. Inside, the rows of drawers sat in straight lines, each with a small glass window and a label card. Most windows were clear, dark behind them. One window halfway down the row was fogged from the inside. Condensation spread across the glass like a bloom. Droplets gathered, fattened, and slid downward in slow tracks. In a room built to prevent moisture, the sight was wrong in a way my body recognized before my brain did. I stepped closer until my flashlight beam reflected off the glass and back into my eyes. The fog was not on my side. It was not my breath. It was trapped inside the compartment. A thin circle had been traced through the condensation, precise and calm, like a fingertip drawing a loop on a car window. Another circle overlapped it, and another, as if whoever made them kept repeating the same motion, polishing a symbol into existence. The lines were clean, not smeared, as though the finger had moved with intention and confidence. I stared at the label, Male 34, Motor Vehicle Collision, received 2 days earlier. I remembered the intake. Trauma to the skull, multiple fractures, declared dead at the hospital, transferred according to procedure. I had signed the acceptance paperwork myself. I could picture the transporter's face, bored and tired, pushing the gurney as if it were just another cart. Humidity, I said, to the steel, to the air, to the part of me that wanted to believe the building was doing this to me. My voice sounded too small, temperature differential. I pulled on a fresh pair of gloves, as if new latex could reset reality. I slid the drawer open. The tracks rasped, The tray came out with a controlled resistance. The body lay still, pale under the cold, wrapped and bandaged where paramedics had tried to stabilize what could not be stabilized. The face was slack. The lips looked closed enough. The eyes were shut. I checked what I could check quickly. No warmth, no motion, no sign anyone had disturbed the wrapping. I pressed 2 fingers briefly against the skin through the glove, then immediately hated myself for doing it, because it felt like touching a boundary. I pushed the tray back in and latched it. Behind the glass, the condensation remained, like a mouth held closed behind teeth. I stayed in the cold room, an extra minute, listening. The compressor cycled somewhere deeper in the building, a low vibration in the floor. I could hear the soft tick of the temperature display. Nothing else moved. No more breath. No new sound. My rational mind seized on the quiet as evidence it had won. Back at my desk, I forced myself to keep working, but the paperwork began to feel like a disguise. The pen felt heavy. My attention kept drifting toward the hall. Each time the compressor clicked, my shoulders tensed. Each time the ventilation pushed a gentle sigh through the ductwork, it sounded too close to lungs. Near the end of the shift, I carried the last stack of forms to the file cabinet. I told myself I was not going to look. Looking would feed it, whatever it was. I would walk past refrigeration like a professional. I glanced anyway. The same window was fogged again, thicker than before. New circles lay on top of the old ones, cleaner, bolder, layered like practice marks. They were centered perfectly, placed to be noticed, and for the first time I had the sensation that the circles had been made after I left, not because of me, but for me. For a moment, anger replaced fear, a sharp, defensive anger at the idea that something could make me doubt my senses in my own workplace. I went into the cold room, slid the drawer open again, and stared at the corpse as if I could catch it in the act of being impossible. Nothing. I closed the drawer with a hard, final click that echoed through the aisles of steel. The echo came back to me with no warmth in it. I checked the door seal with my fingers, pressed along the gasket, searching for cracks, searching for the comforting idea of a leak. The gasket was intact. In my personal notebook, the one I used for shift reminders and phone numbers, I wrote the time and a blunt description of the fogged glass and the circles. I wrote without flourishes. I wrote because a part of me feared the memory would vanish by morning, leaving only the feeling of dread and no proof that it had ever had a shape. I added one line beneath the description, a sentence I did not plan, that arrived on its own. A room can be cold and still feel watched. On the way out, I paused at the back entrance where the city air felt warm. I told myself firmly that nothing had happened. A mechanical issue, a humidity fluctuation, a tired brain. I repeated the words the way people repeat prayers when they do not believe in prayer. The next day, I tried to tell the story the same way to Evan Cole, who was on earlier than I was. Evan had been around the morgue longer. He believed in thermodynamics, not omens. He listened while pouring coffee into a paper cup, eyebrows raised with amused skepticism. Condensation, he said. You open the door, you change pressure, moisture moves. Those windows fog sometimes. You're seeing patterns because you're looking for them. They were circles, I said, not streaks, not random. Evan blew on his coffee. Gloves can smear, your flashlight can distort, and bodies release gases. You'd be surprised what a sealed compartment can do when temperature shifts. I didn't touch the glass, I said. Then I realized how defensive I sounded and hated that too. Evan's smile softened just a fraction. You're a good doc, Mason, he said, but you're running yourself thin. Sleep deprivation does weird things. The brain hates empty space. It fills it. That evening, I arrived early with a plan. I would check the compartment before I did anything else. I would look at the window, photograph it if necessary, and then move on. I would not let the story grow teeth. I brought a small digital hygrometer from the supply cabinet, the kind we used when equipment calibration mattered. I told myself I was being thorough, not afraid. The cold room greeted me with its usual bite. I swept my flashlight across the rows. Every window was clear except the one that had invaded my thoughts. It was fogged again, and this time the condensation held a full handprint pressed into it from the inside, palm and 5 fingers splayed, like someone had leaned hard and left their mark. It was too complete to be an accident. The fingers were long. The spacing looked human. For a heartbeat, my mind tried to argue that it only resembled a hand. Then the shape stopped resembling and started being. I checked the hygrometer, normal for the room. Not perfect, but not abnormal enough to create that kind of fog. My throat tightened. I slid the drawer open. The body lay as it had, but the mouth was slightly parted now, just enough to show darkness between the lips. I remembered it closed. I also remembered how unreliable memory can be after a long night. Still, the sight made my skin prickle as if the air had grown sharper. I looked at the hands, at the nails, at the way the arms rested. Everything was consistent with rigor. Nothing indicated recent movement. Nothing indicated someone had touched the corpse. Nothing explained a handprint on the inside of a sealed window. I pushed the tray back in and latched it. The handprint remained in the fog like a warning. I walked back to the admin room and tried to bury myself in work. The forms came faster than usual that night. A transport from a nursing home, a second from an overnight emergency department, routine deaths, ordinary paperwork. Each signature was a small attempt to keep the world orderly. I forced myself not to check the cold room again, because I could feel my attention tightening around that drawer, the way a bruise tightens around touch. Hours later, a metallic tap sounded from refrigeration. One clean knock, like a ring against steel. I went back with my flashlight and a cautious pace that felt ridiculous because fear has no dignity. The glass now had a hairline crack at the lower corner. I could see it only when the beam hit at the right angle. It was not there earlier. I would have noticed. The crack looked like a vein, delicate and inevitable. Cracks mean force. Force means contact. Contact means something pushed back. I hovered with my hand on the handle, and a thought settled in me like ice. If I open it again, I'm agreeing to play. I opened it anyway. The corpse was still rigid, cold. No sign of impact, no bruising that explained pressure against the window, no obvious reason for the crack. The hands were curled, the nails were intact. It looked exactly like what it was supposed to be, dead matter. I shut the drawer, more carefully this time, as if carefulness could undo the crack. It could not. Back at the desk, I wrote the crack into my notebook. I stared at my own words and felt the strange split inside myself. One part cataloging facts, another part bracing for the next breath. At 11:40 a.m. p.m., I made a decision that felt both rational and reckless. If the window was becoming a screen for whatever this was, I would remove the screen. If I kept the body in open air under a steady lamp, I could watch it without glass between us. I could prove to myself that nothing would happen when I stared. I brought a gurney to refrigeration, slid the drawer open, and transferred the body to the autopsy suite. I covered the body with a clean white sheet. I positioned a work lamp so its light would fall steady and bright. I placed a chair where I could see the sheet's edge from the admin doorway. I wrote the time down because time was the only thing I trusted. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m. The building hummed. Nothing moved. Relief seeped into me like warmth. I began to feel foolish for the fear, and that foolishness tempted me to relax. I nearly convinced myself to put the body back and forget the whole thing. I stared at the door. The hallway remained empty. The world remained obedient. At 26 a.m., I heard the exhale again. It came from the autopsy suite. I stood so fast my chair scraped. I crossed the hall and stopped at the doorway. The work lamp's glass cover was fogged from the inside, beaded with condensation the way the refrigeration window had been. The lamp was hot. It should have been impossible. In that moment, my rational mind lost its footing, because the phenomenon had followed the body out of the cold room and into the warmest light I could provide. The sheet was damp, not soaked, not spilled on, but misted, darkened in patches as if a cold breath had settled over it. The air inside the suite felt different than the air in the hall, heavier, warmer and colder at the same time, like the room had become its own weather. I touched the sheet with gloved fingers. Moisture clung to the latex cold. I lifted the sheet. Clear beads of water slid down the corpse's chest and arms, gathering in hollows, tracking along the skin like sweat. The sight made my stomach flip. Bodies do not sweat. Bodies do not produce water on command. The droplets were too clear, too clean, as if pulled from the air itself. "No," I whispered, a word that sounded like a plea. The overhead fluorescence flickered. The room dimmed for a heartbeat, brightened again, and the air suddenly felt thick, as though the space had lost oxygen. My own breath sounded rude in the hush. Then the chest rose. One slow lift, one deliberate-looking breath, and then it settled back into stillness. My mind snapped between explanations, none of them strong enough. Muscle spasm, gas shift, heat convection. Every option sounded like I was begging physics to save me. And beneath the scramble of logic, another line arrived, sharp as a scalpel. If it can borrow a breath once, it can learn to borrow it again. I dropped the sheet and backed out. I locked the door. I leaned my forehead to the cold metal for a second and tried to feel anything steady. The door did not feel like a barrier anymore. It felt like a lid. In the admin room, my hands shook as I wrote. The pen skittered. The words looked foreign on paper, like someone else's confession. I sat with the notebook open, flashlight within reach, and waited for my heartbeat to slow. It did not. At 2:29 a.m., I heard a sound like nails drawn across steel, faint but unmistakable. It came from behind the autopsy suite door. Fear became physical, a weight in my stomach, a tightness in my ribs. I told myself not to open it. I told myself a locked door was a boundary. Then I realized the boundary existed only in my mind. Whatever was doing this did not respect doors. It respected attention. I unlocked the door and pushed it open with the flashlight beam leading. The sheet was still on the table. The corpse was still under it, but the steel surface near the table's edge had new scratches, bright lines as if something sharp had dragged across it. Those marks were not there earlier. I knew that table's imperfections, like you know the cracks in your own knuckles. The scratches were fresh enough to catch light. A sentence formed in me with clinical clarity. The table is keeping score. I shut the door again and locked it. I returned to my desk and forced myself to sit still, to watch the clock, to let morning arrive like an ambulance. I stared at the door, half expecting to see it swing open on its own. It stayed still, which was almost worse. Stillness can be a disguise. Minutes crawled. The building's ordinary noises resumed, but they no longer comforted me. They sounded like cover. I found myself holding my breath without realizing it, then inhaling in short, panicked sips. At 3:12 a.m., I passed the autopsy suite on my way to the water fountain. A low thump came from inside, soft but decisive, as if something had shifted its weight. I froze with the paper cup in my hand. Silence followed. Then another thump, heavier. I set the cup down and stood in the hall, listening for a third sound that would give me permission to call it imagination. The third sound never came. Instead, I had the unsettling impression that the room was listening back, measuring my hesitation. I unlocked the door. The sheet was on the floor, crumpled near the table legs as if it had been yanked off in one impatient motion. The corpse lay uncovered. The head had turned toward the doorway. The eyes were still closed, but the angle of the face aligned with where I stood, as if it had chosen that orientation. The mouth was parted wider. Water still glistened along the throat and collarbone. The work lamp shone on the skin, and for a second, the droplets made the surface look almost alive, like a sheen of sweat after exertion. I could not take a step into the room. I could not pull my gaze away. A calm, terrible thought settled in. It is not moving to escape. It is moving to be seen. Another thought followed, sharper. Attention is a kind of permission. I shut the door without entering, locked it, and backed away. My keys clinked against each other like teeth. I made it back to my desk and sat down hard, the chair creaking under the sudden weight. At my desk, I did not attempt to work. I kept the flashlight on the table. I considered the security sidearm in the locker and hated myself for considering it. A gun made sense against a person. It was useless against a breath. Still, my hands wanted something solid to grip. My body wanted to believe in tools. Near 4 a.m., a heavy metallic bang echoed from refrigeration. It sounded like a drawer slamming, steel on steel. Then a dragging noise, like a tray sliding. The noises repeated, once, then twice, each time a little farther away, as if something was moving through the cold room from one compartment to another. I stayed seated. I stared at the clock and forced myself not to look. I felt certain that my curiosity was being tested, that the building was baiting me with noise. I refused to rise. My whole body vibrated with the effort. In the notebook, I wrote a line I did not want to admit. The building knows what I will do before I do it. Just before dawn, I heard the refrigeration door latch click. Not a compressor, not a mechanical cycle. A latch, lifted and released. I stood anyway because fear does not stop you from moving. It only changes what moving costs. The cold room door was ajar. The air spilling out felt darker than it should have, like cold carrying shadow. Inside, one drawer was open, tray extended into the aisle, empty. The white sheet I had used earlier was balled on the floor, damp, heavy, stained only with water. My mind searched frantically for paperwork, a transfer request, an authorization, a miscommunication, anything that would make an empty tray just an administrative error. There was nothing. Then I saw the droplets. A trail of water dotted the tile, bright under my flashlight. It led out of the cold room and down the far hallway toward the oldest storage doors, the section of the building that felt the most like a basement, even though it was not. The droplets were spaced like steps. They did not look like a spill. They looked like a path. A line rose in my head, blunt and cold. It wants you to follow the wet. I went to the security locker and took the sidearm. The weight in my hand was comforting in a primitive way, like holding a rock in a cave. I hated the comfort. I hated that my body wanted it. I tucked the flashlight higher and moved as if sound mattered. I followed the droplets a few steps, slow, careful, not daring to splash through them. Halfway down the hall, I heard the exhale behind me, loud enough to carry warmth. It sounded like someone standing inches from my neck, breathing out slowly, satisfied. I spun, flashlight and weapon raised, pulse detonating in my ears. The hallway was empty. No motion, no shadow, only the long corridor and my own breath, suddenly ragged. A droplet fell from somewhere above and tapped the floor. The sound was tiny and obscene in its normality. My heart hammered. My mouth tasted like metal. At the end of the hallway, a steel door glistened. Its surface was wet, as if a damp body had leaned against it. The droplets on the floor curved in a shallow arc around me, as though whatever left them had moved past my position while I stood frozen, leaving me in the center of its path like a joke. I realized then that the trail could have gone straight. It curved, because it wanted to show me that it could. A sentence came, the kind you remember because it feels carved into your bones. You cannot barricade a presence that already knows your lungs. I backed away and retreated to the admin room. I locked doors. I wedged a chair under the handle. I sat with the flashlight on and the sidearm on the desk, listening to the building's machines breathe and wondering how long it took a human mind to break. Nothing else happened. The quiet felt staged, like a curtain dropped after a performance. When morning staff arrived, their voices sounded too bright. Their footsteps felt like rescue. I opened the door and tried to arrange my face into professionalism. I did not tell them the full truth. I said a refrigeration drawer had been found open. I said there was moisture, possibly a seal problem. I asked for maintenance and acted like that was the end of it. If I had said it walked away, they would have looked at me the way people look at a man talking to the empty air. Worse, they would have written it down in the wrong kind of file. The body was claimed later outside my shift according to the log. The paperwork was clean, stamped ordinary. The drawer was cleaned. The cracked glass was replaced. The autopsy suite was polished until the scratches were harder to see. Maintenance checked the refrigeration seals and reported no faults. Evan mentioned the report to me with a smirk, as if the building had proven him right. And then the phenomena stopped. No more fog, no more circles, no more handprints, no more breath in the hall. The building returned to its predictable cruelty. The silence went back to being just silence. For a while, that should have been enough. I told myself the explanation was simple. The source had left with the body. Whatever had made the glass fog and the sheet damp had been contained in that compartment, and now it was gone. I needed that belief to do my job. That belief held until one night a week later, when I woke in my apartment with the sense that the air had thickened. The room felt smaller. My chest felt tight, as if the oxygen had thinned. I lay still, staring at the ceiling, hearing the distant city through the window. I told myself it was stress. I told myself it was trauma. I told myself I was safe. I tried to breathe slowly the way therapists tell people to breathe when their minds are running. Then, right beside my ear, I heard it, a long, tired exhale. It was so close I felt warmth on my skin. I did not move. I did not turn my head. In the darkness, my mind delivered a truth, as brutal as any autopsy finding. It never needed the drawer. It only needed a witness. And when I finally involuntarily drew in a breath, the window pane across the room fogged from the inside, blooming with a soft halo of condensation, as if something unseen had leaned close and learned exactly how I breathed.